The nucleolus is the macrocosmic God. The nucleus is the divine substance, the heavenly waters upon and within which moves the spirit or life. That's interesting. Want to know more? Please continue watching.
If slaughterhouses had glass walls, everyone would be a vegetarian. Sir Paul McCartney, vegetarian.
Hello, vivacious viewers. I'm Hattie. The sincere people of the United Kingdom are inspired by your enthusiastic sharing of the plant-based way of life. May we soon see a vegan world for the heavenly safety and dignity of all beings. Dr. Anna Kingsford, an insightful English Theosophist of the 1880s, was said to be clairvoyant from the time she could speak. She herself felt that she came from the fairy realm and was given permission to be born as a human being so as to carry out her destiny. At the tender age of 13, Anna wrote the book, Beatrice, a tale of the early Christians. Her early wisdom can be seen in the following excerpt. How foolish are they who seek to promote their own comfort by making it their sole study. They lose the very object of their desires and invariably render themselves restless and unhappy. While maintaining her spiritual and vegetarian interests, Anna Kingsford became a doctor. Not only was she one of the first female medical doctors in England, she graduated from medical school without experimenting on any animals. The subject of her medical degree thesis was vegetarianism and ethics. This led Dr. Kingsford to the writing and publishing of a well-received book, The Perfect Way in Diet. Dr. Kingsford continued with her inner spiritual and mystical experiences, which she documented in several books, in collaboration with longtime friend Edward Maitland. She also became known as an outspoken animal and women's rights activist. In The Perfect Way, or The Finding of Christ, the spiritual values of Christianity and Theosophy are merged to identify the Christ principle which everyone is capable of discovering within. We now share with you selections from the book's 5th lecture, which highlights the impermanence of our physical world compared to the true and eternal nature of the divine. And while these higher realms manifest through a myriad of physical forms, our true nature is only freed after the divine spirit within has reconnected with God. The 5th lecture, The Constitution of Existence, Part 3. Thus does the science of things, material and transient, present us with the image of things substantial and eternal, and thus does knowledge of the phenomenal minister to the divine gnosis. As is the microcosm, so also is the macrocosm. As is the cell, so is the man, so the planet, and so the solar system. And in all, the order of creation is that set forth in the opening chapter of the truly hermetic book of Genesis, the work of the 4th day, being in each the manifestation of the Son, the nucleolus or central spirit of the system, by the polarization of all the elements of the system, and so of the whole universal cosmos, mystically termed the Grand Man. The nucleolus is the macrocosmic God. The nucleus is the divine substance, the heavenly waters upon and within which moves the spirit or life. That is, the nucleolus, the protoplasmic fluid, is the manifest ether, interplanetary as well as intermolecular, the medium of light, heat, and electricity. And finally, the cell membrane is matter, in its visible and tangible condition. Of these four we know that God and substance are alone eternal and absolute, matter and the astral ether being derived and relative. It is in these last that the infinite substance particularizes itself. The various individual finite forms thus arising constitute what Spinoza calls modi. These are to substance what the waves are to the sea, shapes that perpetually die away that never are. Nothing finite is possessed of a self-subsistent individuality. The finite individual exists indeed because the unlimited productive power of substance must give birth to an infinite variety of particular finite forms. But these have no proper reality. Substance is the only real. But that which is true of substance as a whole is true also of it in subdivision. Substance individualized is still substance, and each segregated portion of it undergoes similar changes in respect of manifestation. The error which has arisen in connection with the Spinozic doctrine consists in the application of the term modus to the essential self of the individual, whereas the truth is that this self, being actually divine and having by the process known as creation acquired individuality, is like God, permanent both in being and in personality, and changeable only as to the mode of its manifestation in matter. It is this material modus, which is transient and unreal, belonging, as it does, to that world of phenomenon or illusion, which is expressed in Hindu philosophy by the term Maya. That which is real and permanent in the individual is thus to be conceived of as an integral portion of that divine self, who subsists at once both as an infinite whole and in infinite subdivision. In the right apprehension of this doctrine lies the reconciliation of esoteric Christianity with esoteric Buddhism. Esoteric Christianity teaches the everlasting permanence of the acquired personality of every redeemed individual. Esoteric Buddhism insists that personality is an illusion belonging to the sphere of existence, on the ground that permanent being is necessarily impersonal inasmuch as it is one. The explanation is that there are to each individual two personalities, the one phenomenal and therefore transient, the other substantial and therefore permanent. And while Buddhism declares truly the evanescence of the former, Christianity declares truly the permanence of the latter, representing, as does this latter personality, the sum total of all that the individual really is, the force which animates and the substance which constitutes him. It corresponds in the organic cell to the nucleus, the false outer personality, vulgarly taken for the real, having its correspondence in the protoplasmic body, which falls away and disperses at the breakup of the cell. Recognition between soul and soul will be finally possible only according to the degree of love which, during their passage through the phenomenal, may have united them. For such love only as has been intense and divine enough in its nature to penetrate beyond the mere outer personality into the true being will be everlasting in duration. All lesser and lower loves, cares, attractions, affinities, or interests belong wholly to the terrestrial, and, when physical disintegration occurs, are abandoned to the astral atmosphere. In this atmosphere, they continue to exist, just so long as the respective vitality of each particle permits. As in the parenchyma of the tissues, do the protoplasmic corpuscles set free by the breaking up of the cell. All principles endure. Whatever during the soul's experience of transient personality has, in any incarnation, acquired the nature of principle, that is, of being, is ultimately absorbed by and continues to exist in the permanent personality when, having completed its kalpa, it is finally redeemed from existence. For principles are essential and therefore indestructible, being indefeasible properties of deity. For this reason, it is said that in heaven everything is personal, the idea of personality being inherent in every molecule of the infinite person, the return into oneness with whom constitutes nirvana. Redemption is thus exhibited as the final cause of creation, for therein existence returns into being, phenomenon into essence, matter into spirit. The universe reverts to its Sabbath of perfection, and God rests from the work of manifestation. It is, in fact, the acquirement of true personality that constitutes immortality, and therefore redemption. Perdition consists in failure to attain permanence as a person, and it implies therefore dissolution and dissipation, for, as all is of God, annihilation of the substance of things is impossible. Consisting of the substance of God, and differentiated only by mode and not by nature, the creature possesses the potentiality of the Creator, and is capable of attaining to the condition of God. Thus the nucleolus, or divine spirit, appears to be spontaneously generated in the nucleus or soul, because all substance is penetrated, suffused and charged with the spirit from the beginning, though it is not manifested until the element of the nucleus or soul is polarized in such a degree as no longer to disperse, but to converge and thereby render manifest the divine light subsisting, latent in its substance. This operation is the analogue of the polarization of physical light, a process consisting of a certain modification of the luminous ray, by virtue of which, once reflected or refracted, it becomes incapable of reflecting or refracting itself again in any but one direction. This condition of the ray, which under the old theory of emission was founded on the conception of a material fluid of light, must now be held to depend on the parallel direction assumed by the magnetic poles of all the molecules of ether constituting the vehicle of the ray. In like manner, when the molecules of the psychic element are so directed that their axis all converge to a central point, in accordance with this law of polarization or gravitation, which, as has been said, is the one law alike of matter and of spirit, the whole will of the soul is single and harmoniously centralized throughout all its elementary molecules. In such a soul, the divine spirit, latent and permanent before its polarization, becomes centralized and manifest.
Vegan side effect? Feel your good willpower's huge increase? Ah, not to worry.
The fifth lecture, The Constitution of Existence, Part 3. The process of polarization in matter is itself dependent on the existence and direction of the magnetic forces of its particles. Science has demonstrated the presence around every material molecule of particular currents which, before magnetization, are indeterminately and heterogeneously directed and mutually antagonistic, but which, after magnetization, circulate in such a manner that not only do all assume the same direction in parallel planes, but their central points are also all disposed in linear series parallel to the axis of the entity to which the molecules belong, which thus becomes a system of circular currents, equal and parallel throughout its mass. Every form of matter is capable of magnetization, and every molecule of matter, therefore, is capable of developing a current of its own, and is necessarily likewise possessed of poles and an equator. These poles, which before magnetization are heterogeneously directed, assume under magnetization such a position as to form continuous lines of rays, and the contiguity of the positive pole of every molecule to the negative pole of its immediate successor constitutes the series a chain of magnetic attraction. That which is, in physical science, the magnetic current inherent in every molecule of matter is, in Hermetic science, the will of the microcosmic individual. The two molecular poles represent the dual ego of every personality, and the equator the unity of this duality. In the system of the unregenerate man, there are many elementary wills, all mutually antagonistic and destructive, the mind warring against the heart, and the senses against the intuition, so that the man is, as it were, torn by contrary winds and carried hither and thither by diverse passions. And of this condition, the result is first spiritual disease, that is, sin, and finally death, that is, dissolution. But in the regenerate man, one harmonious will prevails throughout the whole being, because of every element therein the will, which is the spirit, operates in one direction, causing every elementary ego to polarize itself centrally, and thus producing throughout the whole system a regularized series of molecular currents, of which the resultant collective current is the will of the man himself. And of this will, united by attraction to the divine will, which is the universal magnet, the central point of radiation is the microcosmic God, the Adonai of the human kingdom. Himself, the express image of the infinite personality. Such is the condition of the man regenerate and redeemed. By the violation of this harmony is set up disease, which is spiritual or physical, according to the sphere of the disturbance. For the destruction of the polar equilibrium of the cells gives rise to cross-magnetisms, and these, in their turn, cause, in the protoplasmic medium of the cells affected, eddies and other irregular currents, which whirl with accelerated velocity around the local foci, which have generated them, and, by attracting within their sphere the disintegrated particles of ruptured cells in their vicinity, presently cause these to become manifest as masses of protoplasmic granulation. Such also is the generation of the astral incubi and ephemera. It occurs through the disintegration of the collective will of the system concerned, and the divergence of the parts in different directions, with consequent dispersion of the mental forces, and their dissipation in the extraneous and illusory. Neither disease nor death, in the ordinary meaning of the word, could reign in a perfectly polarized entity, as neither sin nor weakness could be manifest in a soul perfectly harmonized with and obedient to the divine will. But instead of the process of death, as we are ordinarily accustomed to see it, with all its attendant horrors of suffering, delirium and corruption, would be witnessed the passing away of the regenerate, in whom the earthly soul has become suffused with the divine, and every element of the human personality vitalized by spirit. The Buddha Gautama, when dying, said to his disciples, "Beloved, that which causes life causes also death and decay." The illusion was, doubtless, to the operation of the magnetic body, by which is formed the embryo before birth, and by which, likewise, the magnetic forces of the earthly frame are gradually reabsorbed and exhausted. That which puts forth centrifugally resolves centripetally when its cycle is accomplished. In the healthily born, purely nourished, unpoisoned and undrugged body, death resembles transmutation rather than dissolution. Disintegration of the organism ensues as a result not of any pathological process, for that would imply physical sin of a mortal kind, but of the gradual withdrawal of the animal life into the magnetic and consequent gradual reinforcement of the latter, precisely as in the cell about to disintegrate, its protoplasmic contents are seen to become better defined, and to increase as, simultaneously, their containing capsule becomes more tenuous and transparent. And, where the astral, or merely protoplasmic, has itself been in great measure transmuted into psychic substance, the process implies necessarily a reversion from the material to the spiritual plane. In such wise have passed away most of the saints and holy men of all lands, and with a dissolution of this kind, the relations of the redeemed soul with matter may terminate altogether. It is the consummation of the redemption from the power of the body and from the sting of death, which is sin. Let me die the death of the righteous, and let my last end be like his.
Because the law of heaven is, a life destroyed must be compensated. Teachings of the Saints, Taoism.
Marvelous viewers, it's been delightful to have your company for today's Words of Wisdom. Coming up next is Glacier National Park, the Crown of the Continent, Part 2 of 2, right after Noteworthy News, here on Supreme Master Television. In deep contemplation of the divine, may you marvel at the interconnectedness of all creation.
Our programs offer many languages. Please visit suprememastertv.com/schedule and suprememastertv.com/WOW.
Nos programmes offrent plusieurs langues. Veuillez visiter suprememastertv.com/schedule et suprememastertv.com/WOW.
Nuestros programas ofrecen varios idiomas. Visiten suprememastertv.com/schedule y suprememastertv.com/WOW.
番組は多言語放送です。放送予定は suprememastertv.com/schedule そして suprememastertv.com/WOW